Today we're going to be working on a 2005 Mini Cooper S. This is the 1.6 liter supercharged version. We've got an oil leak. It is coming from, I believe, the oil filter bracket. Might have to get a flashlight. It's up in here. There's also an oil cooler on this model. There you can see the lid of the oil filter housing. And if you look over the power steering pump fan, you can kind of see that wet bolt there. That's the bottom left bolt of the oil filter housing. So the gasket is in between there and the block. I waited until the car was due for an oil change before I was going to attempt this repair, just because I'd like to have it empty and make as little mess as possible when I remove that housing. And I also plan to replace the seal that's in between the oil cooler and the filter housing. So this is the gasket for the housing to the block, kind of a triangle shape, and then this is supposed to be the seal from the oil cooler to the housing. All right, with the oil drained, we're going to start by taking this heat shield off the top of the exhaust. Should just be a couple of 13 millimeters. You don't have to remove this shield if you don't want to. You can just kind of push it back on top of the manifold there. And you can see now there's another shield that needs to be removed. You got a 10 millimeter bolt right down there on that. Before you take that lower shield off, it's on top of the starter, so to prevent the risk of any electrical issues arcing, just come out back, remove the battery negative cable, and then prop this open, because now you have no power and you don't have to use the emergency cable to open it up. 10 millimeter, I've got an 18-inch extension on the 1/4-inch drive ratchet. On the driver's side of that lower heat shield, there's a little clip that has an oxygen sensor wire in it. You can bend that up and slip that wire out. It'll give you a little more flexibility on where you can push that shield out of the way. Looks like it's kind of running into the oil cooler lines down there. You may just have to work around it. Next, we'll get our slim 36mm socket for removing oil filter cap. Get a 3/8 drive ratchet on that and take that off. Not a lot of clearance in there, but you can slowly my light's right in the way of where it would be the best camera view. Just get it loose enough, you can pull that out with the filter in it. As I said before, I waited until there needed to be an oil filter, or sorry, an oil change before I did this. So we'll be putting a new filter in when we go back in. Probably not going to be able to get very good video footage of this because I'm going to have to be working down in this space, kind of pushing this shield out of the way, and at the same time working with the ratchet back towards the front of the car. I don't believe I'll be able to get my phone down in here for a very good view on anything because of that heat shield. But when I do get a ratchet, an extension, probably maybe even a swivel on a bolt, I'll try and show an image of kind of orientation of how I have it in there. But it's going to be mostly by feel, trying to get to all three of these bolts to get that housing loose. And the first one's going to be the top bolt. So you can see I'm in here. Got a 6-inch extension with a 13mm pointed back. And you can see right there where I'm on the bolt. So just kind of lift this up and get back this direction. Then there's another bolt that's a bit hard to see, but it's directly underneath that bolt. It's further down below. So it'll be probably close to the same angle to get on that second bolt. And there's only a couple of clicks of ratchet movement at a time here. Once you get it loose though, probably can start spinning it off by hand with that extension. All right, the next bolt, extremely difficult to see with the camera, but you can look up right above the power steering rack, above the axle shaft, and that bolt back in there. To the right here is the oil cooler. So that gives you a reference. It's like right behind the oil cooler, and it goes through the housing. So I'm going to get on that 1/4-inch drive ratchet with an 18-inch extension, then a 6-inch extension, and then a universal joint and a 13. And you can probably use different size ratchets. My 1/4-inch drive universal joint still has some stiffness to it, so you can kind of aim the socket. So it's hard to see because my glove is in the way, but I'm on it now. So that is the bottom passenger side bolt. Probably gonna be hard to keep focus on that bolt, but I'm gonna grab a magnet and reach up in there and pull that out. It's going to be a longer bolt because it's got to go through the thickness of that housing. The final bolt is on the lower driver's side. It's one covered in oil that we kind of looked at first. Your access is possibly going to be over the top of the power steering fan, or maybe you might remove that power steering fan to get to it. The challenge is going to be swing space for turning a ratchet or a wrench on that bolt. I don't believe that you're going to be able to get to it from the backside because of all these heat shields, power steering rack, and everything in the way. I think I am going to go ahead and remove that power steering fan. Just a couple of 13mm nuts. And be careful, there's an electrical plug on the back side of it that you're going to have to disconnect before you go pulling it out of there. If you remove that passenger side nut first, you can kind of lower it and rotate the fan a little bit, and that gives you access here to this electrical plug. The depression clip is on top. And it's a little stuck, so I'm gonna set the phone down, but you can see the tab here on top. When I push down, it lifts up on the back half there. But I need to use both hands to hold this still and pull that off. All right, just got that plug removed. Finished taking off that nut. And remove the assembly. Now you got a better look at the access for that bolt there. Looks like I can get on it with just a 3/8 drive ratchet. It'll be slow going on the removal. Might switch to a 1/4" drive after I get it looser so that I can fit my whole hand up in there. And everything up here is oily. And much more swing room with the 1/4" drive ratchet there. And then after a little bit, we'll get some oil drain out because the bracket comes loose, or the housing comes loose. And you can finish spinning that bolt out of the way and just kind of separate the housing from the block enough to get your new gasket in. With that last bolt out, you can see it's dropped. There's some separation there between the engine block and the mount, and so you can use something and kind of push away from the block there. Try to do this with 3 different things at once. So you can see you can push away, get your clearance to put your gasket in. I went ahead and removed the passenger wheel. You can kind of get in here and see now. Right there's the gap. Right here, the gap between the block and the housing. And you can use the oil cooler hoses and kind of move that housing around. And so the other piece that I'm going to remove here is the oil filter bracket cooler, which is this accordion looking piece. Should just be held on by some Torx head screws. Looks like 4 of them. There'll be 2 on the right, 1 on the left, and 1 on the top. Kind of hard to see, there's no light on the one on the top, but it's right in the middle. I don't think there's any on the bottom. So we'll remove that next. If you can see that, I got about a 12-inch extension in there with a T30 on the top right Torx head bolt. And it's really just going to be however you can reach those. Might have to use a universal joint or different size extensions, or might have to slim down to a 1/4" drive ratchet to get inside of there. But you need to get those 4 screws out next. You get those 4 screws out and you can pull this cooler housing away. You can see that it's going to need 2 seals. This one's stuck to the housing, but right there's the 2 ports that will each need a seal. So I'm going to have to get a second seal to fill that. And then you can also start to see with this loose, you can kind of push it down out of the way because it's attached to hoses. And you can turn the filter housing sideways. I can get a focus here. Now you can see that triangular shaped gasket on the housing. So we've got an easy way to go ahead and pull that out with a pick or something. And we'll clean up the surface on the side of the block there right in front of it. Then we'll put that gasket on and we will attach it back to the block before we do the cooler, because I got to get a second seal, but that's probably the best process anyway. So I just reached in there with a pick, pulled it out. You want to match up the orientation. So I've got it backwards here. I'll flip over my blue gasket there. Now that matches. And we'll we'll go ahead and install that gasket and clean up the block side. It'll be good to go on that one. All right, you can see I got the new blue gasket on the housing, and I'm going to raise the vehicle up, turn that filter housing back up where it's supposed to be, and try and get the last bolt I took out was on the passenger side lower right here, and that's the first one that I'm going to try to put in. I'm going to put in the lower passenger and then try and start the long bolt and save the top one for last. All right, there's the bottom left bolt. Got her bolted back on. It's all torqued down. Center bolt. Remember, you can barely see up through that hole. Right there. Here's a good look of the housing from the side without the oil cooler on it. So those two ports for the hoses, those each get a seal on them. So I went and picked up a second seal. And the surface that you're going to need to clean off here is right there. Still got one seal stuck to it. So I'll clean that off, and we'll get that oil cooler put back on next. All right, you can see we got that wiped down and cleaned. So next up, we will stick the seals in those two port holes on the housing, and then we'll get our Torx heads, or T30s, put back on and torque down to 141 inch-pounds. All right, that's what it looks like with the oil cooler back hooked up. So we got one bolt in the bottom left, one in the upper left middle, one in the bottom right, and one in the top right. Again, those are 141 inch-pounds. All right, now that we've got the oil system, so the cooler and the filter housing back attached and everything closed up, except for the filter's not in it yet. But from the underneath side perspective, it's kind of open down here now because I still haven't put the power steering fan back. I'm gonna blow off some of this oil and grease residue with some engine degreaser. So before I do that, I will go put the new filter and the filter cap back on so nothing gets in there. Then I'm gonna kind of wash this off before I put the power steering fan back up on these two studs here. Got our new filter in. Might have to move that heat shield out of the way to get it installed. Put a little oil around the O-ring here so it doesn't bind when you're tightening it down. And get the slim 36. I believe it's 36, yep. Slim 36 socket. And get a 3/8 ratchet on that and tighten it the rest of the way down. It should bottom out. And we'll get this heat shield back in place. There's a little grommet down below that I knocked off, I'll show you. Then we'll put the top heat shield back in place and we'll be ready to fill it back up with oil and done. So I apologize for the sun glare, but I don't have any blinds on the shop windows, so I can't really block it out. But you can kind of see this heat shield right here. And there's a hole in the end of it, right here. Well, there's also a little prong sticking on there, a little dowel. This actually presses into the hole in the heat shield, this direction, and then slips onto the dowel. Or sorry, other way. Presses into the heat shield this way and slips onto the dowel. So that's what I'll be doing next, and I'll just show you what it looks like when I'm finished. All right, so dowel pressed into the heat shield and then, or sorry, bushing pressed into the heat shield and then slipped over the dowel. That's what it looks like. Now we can go back up top and put that 10mm in the lower heat shield. But one more thing before we go back up top, and that's going to be the power steering fan. So we'll do just like opposite of taking it off. Start the nut on the driver's side. So that we can pivot this out of the way and plug our connector back in. And we'll just tighten both those up, 13 mil. All right, now we'll go back up. All right, next we will try and line that heat shield back up and get our 10 millimeter installed right in that hole. All right, that's the lower, and the upper, if you remember, we just slid it down over the back there. And pull it up into place and put in our 213s. Right about there, and that'll be it. I did forget one thing. Before we put that top heat shield on, we want to put that O2 sensor wire back in the little clip right there. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to get that on camera. There we go, just slip it back in there. Now we can move the upper shield up and put it back on. Got the first one started. And just tighten those down with a 13 millimeter. Don't forget your negative battery cable. Reinstall. Now we'll just add our 5 quarts of 5W30 and this job will be complete. That's how you fix a couple of oil leaks, oil cooler gasket and or seal, and also the oil filter housing gasket that are common leaks on these minis. If you like today's video, please subscribe to the channel.